Hi there, I just thought I'd make a quick extra video for you to have a watch of this month because in our classes we're focusing on our pelvic floor, and as we've been taking the classes this month we've had a few questions around our pelvic floor and around you getting a better understanding of what our pelvic floor is, when we need to get it working, how it should feel when we're getting it working, and the best ways to get it working. For any of you who might have joined our classes recently, if you've come and had a class with other instructors, my name's Anna, so I run Animated Physio. I'm a physio and a Pilates instructor, and I thought it was a really nice touch for our memberships to try and bring a different focus in each month. So in previous months we did our ice cream challenges in August, where we were doing like balance work and leg strengthening work, trying to keep our balance without dropping our imaginary ice creams. We've done some upper body work, working on our press ups before as well. And then so this month we're doing some focus on our pelvic floor. So I guess why do we think it's important to work on our pelvic floor? So I'm trained in women's health physio, as well as what we call normal sort of musculoskeletal physio. And I do see lots of mostly like postnatal women through my mummy MOT assessments, which are the postnatal assessments that can be really helpful for you to have after having a baby, because we know that caregiving on the NHS is a little bit limited nowadays. But actually, one of the questions that we were getting when I said we were going to do pelvic floor work this month was that we have quite a lot of men in our classes as well as women, and even some of the women was going like, oh, what are the men going to do when we're going to do these pelvic floor exercises, because it's not relevant to them. But you know, it is relevant for men to do their pelvic floor exercises as well, because our pelvic floor muscles are there in both men and women, and they actually support our internal organs, and they control our bladder and our bowel function as well. So it's really important for that control of our, when we're going for a poo or in our flow of urine, for our pelvic floors to be functioning well. So yes, it's important for both men and women. So when we're talking through how to contract our pelvic floor, I know there's been a little bit of confusion around what we should be doing, what we should be feeling. So the most effective cue, it tends to be most effective for males and females, is that we should be imagining that we're trying to hold in wind. So we actually have a thicker musculature of our pelvic floor muscles towards our back passage. And if we can get those muscles to work well through our back passage, that actually feeds forward to give us a really nice contraction and good control of those muscles, feeding all the way forwards from our back passage through to the front. So if you imagine that you're holding in wind, that can often be the most effective cue to get those pelvic floor muscles working. Another like gender neutral one that can be helpful is to imagine that you're walking into the sea, and the sea is very cold, and it's kind of that squeezing up feeling that you might get as you walk into some cold water. The other one that can be quite nice to think about, that again is a gender neutral one, is not one for you to practice, but if you're going to the toilet, you're going for a wee, imagine that you're stopping your flow of urine mid-wee. So it's that sensation like you're trying to stop yourself from doing a wee. But we do recommend that you don't do that as a practice of your pelvic floor exercises whilst you're going to the toilet, because actually trying to stop the flow of urine while you're going to the toilet, that can increase your risk of having a UTI or cause your pelvic floor muscles to actually become what we call hypertonic or overactive. So best not to do it whilst you're having a wee, but it's that thought process of you know, in the classes, when you're doing your exercises, it's that you're imagining like you're stopping yourself from going for a wee. That can be another good cue to use to get those muscles working. So there are cues that we can think about to try and get that contraction. If we're thinking about contracting our pelvic floor muscles in isolation, so on their own, we shouldn't be feeling any squeezing through our inner thigh muscles, our bum muscles, and not really in our tummy muscles either, okay? We should just feel that lift through our pelvic floor. Around our back passage. So it's quite nice to do it sitting, to start with sometimes. If you're sitting on like a firm surface, so like I'm sitting on the floor at the moment, or if you sit onto like a harder chair, it's easier for you to feel that kind of bit of a lift as you contract your pelvic floor muscles. So we want our pelvic floor muscles to work functionally, we want them to work when we're doing other activities, but if we're noticing that we're having issues around our toileting, around that control of our bladder and our bowels, it's a good idea to just think about trying to get those muscles to work in isolation first of all. So we know what that squeeze feels like, we know that we can get those muscles working, and we know that we're not just trying to compensate by squeezing our bum muscles or squeezing those inner thigh muscles or tightening our tummy muscles, instead of actually contracting those pelvic floor muscles that we need to work to control our continence. So as we're contracting our pelvic floor muscles, when you think about doing an isolated contraction, to start off with, it can be helpful to time it with your breath. And a bit like when I instruct any other exercises, we want to try and contract on the exhale. So the reason for doing this, so as you're breathing out, what should happen is that your belly is sort of falling, and it's to do with the movement of our diaphragm as well. So as we exhale, our diaphragm actually should lift up a little bit. So that lift of our diaphragm, that gentle sort of falling of our belly, that should help with that lift of our pelvic floor. So you're already getting that bit of assistance by the way that we call it our intra-abdominal pressure. So the pressure through our tummy muscles or through the insides of our tummy is changing. So on that exhale, it's easy to get that lift and to get those pelvic floor muscles engaging. And then you want to try and let those muscles relax off as you inhale. And again, the reason for this, that you think about as you do a big breath in, your diaphragm actually moves down, and that causes your pelvic floor muscles to, again, have that little bit of sort of downwards pressure on them. So then as you let them relax on your inhale, that's kind of, again, assisted by a diaphragm. So our breathing is quite closely connected to how our pelvic floor works as well, which again, when I see people in my clinic that are coming in with issues with their continence, often I'll look at how they're breathing and start them off with timing things with their breathing to start with. So in our classes this month, we've kind of been talking about trying to time that initial contraction and relaxation of our pelvic floor muscles in isolation, the timing that with our breath. So think about it like any other exercise as well. We're exhaling on the effort. So exhale as you squeeze, and then inhale as you relax as a starting point, okay? Just for you to start to get that sensation, that communication between your brain and your muscles to get it working effectively. It's also really important for our pelvic floor muscles to relax off. And I guess that thinking about any other muscle in our body. So I like to use a bicep as an example. So if I asked you to walk around all day with your bicep contracted, so you had to hold your arm really tight, you're trying to squeeze that bicep muscle, the arm muscle to try and hold yourself there. If you hold that like that all the time, very soon your arm is going to get very sore and very achy, right? And then when you do go to try and use your arm, it's already contracted, so you can't actually bend it anymore, you can't really do anything with it, right? So if you think about your pelvic floor in the same way, we want our pelvic floor to be relaxed, so that when we do need it to work functionally, it's going to contract and do as we want. It's not going to be feeling tight or sore or tired or achy. Okay, so being able to contract and relax the muscle is really important, which is why we, again, as a starting point, I like to time the contraction with our breathing. So we're trying to really focus on that nice bit of relaxation as we inhale. And then moving on just to talking a little bit around, if you are experiencing pelvic floor symptoms, so one of the ones a lot of people say that they get a little bit of like leaking or a sensation like they might leak urine when they cough or sneeze or do something like, I don't know, suddenly like run or jump. So it's that kind of stress on your pelvic floor that causes that bit of leaking. So one of the really handy tips you can try is that if you feel like you're about to cough or sneeze, before that cough or sneeze comes, if you can, try and think about trying to do that lift of your pelvic floor. And we call that the knack. So it's trying to just cause that contraction of your pelvic floor. So your pelvic floor is ready, that extra pressure that it's going to get on it as you cough or sneeze or jump or run. Okay, so you're trying to just think about doing that extra little squeeze before you do your cough or sneeze, and then hopefully that gets your pelvic floor working to protect you, so that you don't hopefully then get those like leaking sensations when the cough or sneeze happens. So that's called the knack. So it's trying to just preempt when those when you get that extra pressure on your pelvic floor from coughing or sneezing, and trying to get that contraction so it happens before that cough or sneeze happens. Hopefully that's made sense. So that's the knack. And the other one that can be quite a handy little tip is, can be more effective around what we call urge incontinence. So urge incontinence is when like you feel like you're going, you get that urgency to go to the toilet, when sometimes it's like if you put the key in the door when you get home, you might need a wee a little bit, but actually when you put the key in the door, all of a sudden you're absolutely desperate. Or sometimes it's like if you hear running water, or like when you're in certain situations, then all of a sudden like you have the urge to go for a wee and you feel like it's hard for you to control. So a little tip that can sometimes help that is for you to do a heel raise, so standing up and pushing up onto your toes, doing a heel raise. So what that does is basically, the way that our bodies work is we've got so muscles and nerves, and our nerves that run down into our legs. One of those nerves actually kind of comes up and affects the nerves that run into our pelvic floor. It's called the pudendal nerve. And so by pushing up onto our toes, it causes a bit of a stimulation of that pudendal nerve, and that can help your pelvic floor muscles to work effectively. And sometimes that can just calm that urge just a little bit. So say you put your key in the door to get home, and suddenly you get that urge, just try and just push up onto your toes and hold it there, or do a few little heel raises. and often you might find that urge just settles down just a little bit. So that's another little tip that can be helpful. And then lastly, so we've kind of talked about working our pelvic floor muscles in isolation, working them to control sort of stress and urge incontinence. And the other thing is that we obviously want our pelvic floor muscles to work functionally through the day. We don't just want to be able to do that squeeze on its own. You want your pelvic floor muscles to work through the day when you're doing, you know, your daily activities, when you're at work, when you're playing with your children or your grandchildren, you know, if you're doing any sport or exercise, we want those pelvic floor muscles working well. Again, in our classes, we've been doing a bit of like isolation work with our pelvic floor muscles, and then we've been building it into an exercise. So this first week, I've been focusing on engaging our pelvic floor muscles lying on our back, which is one position to start working them in. And then we've been moving into a shoulder bridge. So we've been doing an exercise whilst we've been thinking about that pelvic floor contraction. Moving forward through the other weeks, we're going to try some different positions. So we're going to try engaging our pelvic floor in isolation when we're standing up, and then try and build that into doing some other movements. So we might try and do some squats or some heel raises or some lunges, okay? Because we want our pelvic floor to work well when we're standing up and moving around on our feet, right? And then we're gonna try, on one of the other weeks, we might try the engagement when we're on our hands and knees. And then, so you're trying to do that engagement in isolation on your hands and knees, and then building that into doing some other exercise on our hands and knees. So maybe the one where you hover your knees away from the floor, like the box hover exercise, that can be a really nice one to feel that contraction. Or while you're doing a cat stretch as well, again, that can be quite a nice one where you can think about that contraction of your pelvic floor as you're going through some movements with your body. And then hopefully as we start to get that pelvic floor working in isolation, we build it into an exercise, then hopefully the next step is that it works better functionally for you day to day. So I know that's been quite a lot of information. Hopefully it's all made sense. If you do have any other questions around your pelvic floor, please do let me know. If you would like some like one-to-one help with this as well, I do offer pelvic health appointments through my physio appointments. So I do like the postnatal ones are called Mummy OMTs, but you can also just book a normal physio appointment with me, and we can address pelvic health issues in that appointment. So that's something that I do as well. So if you're having issues with your continence, if you are finding that you're leaking when you're doing things, if you're not sure, like when we're doing our pelvic floor exercise, you're really struggling with that technique, then it might be worth you booking a one-to-one, and we can have a talk through it in a bit more detail. And I do also do like pelvic floor assessments, which is something that would be totally up to you if you did come in to see me one-to-one, but we can progress up to like an internal assessment. So I would have a look and a feel of how your pelvic floor muscles are working. But yeah, if you've got any further questions about that, please do let me know. You can email me anytime. It's info@animatedphysio.co.uk. And obviously I'll see most of you at the classes. I hope you enjoy that bit of focus on our pelvic floor this month, something a little bit different. And fingers crossed by the end of the month, you feel a bit more confident about getting those pelvic floor muscles working, and you feel like they're starting to get stronger.